Hello everyone and welcome back to another Tanzerr Speedo video. So today we're going to be creating a small cozy family home in Tartosa, which kind of reminds me of just like a luxurious vacation lot, and that was kind of like the main goal that I had while I was creating this build. And I just started off by placing the second floor over the terrain and just like trying to pretend as if there was like some sort of bridge, even though it's not really like logical, because you can literally navigate it around the actual pond itself rather than like having to walk over the bridge. But I still wanted to have something scenic right in front of where we have the build itself, and I thought it was kind of like a nice little touch, especially since we are working with a smaller little lot space. I wanted it to feel a little bit whimsical, definitely just house a lot of different foliage pieces throughout this entire build and just make it feel very luscious and greenery, because as you guys can already see throughout the entire world currently, there's just so much going on in terms of like the greenery and stuff like that. So I wanted to incorporate and implement a lot of that in this build in itself. And as you guys currently see right now, we have a small simple shell going on. We kind of just have like a small T shape with a few balconies on certain parts of the build, and I really love the overall like simple design that we have here, because if you guys have been a member of the channel for a while now, which if you guys haven't seen, I highly recommend you guys to check out my channel if you guys like Sims 4 builds and stuff like that. But I tend to build a lot of these huge modern mega mansions that I feel like a lot of people might not like want to play with them because they're so huge, or just want something that's a bit more maintainable. And I feel like this is definitely a lot more appropriate if you guys do plan to play like long term, or just like in a small little build like this. And there are also a few additional spaces throughout the entire build, and like a few rooms and stuff like that that you guys can definitely expand upon, or just like change some of the stuff if you guys want some additional functionality into the build. But so far we just have a nice little shape going on, and I just used two simple gabled roofs and kind of just merged them together. And yeah, I just really like how the minimalistic design of this build overall just comes alive with the rest of the small little details that we have across this entire lot. And I also really love this small arched sort of curved roof piece off to the side of the build, where we also have pretty much like a bunch of different doors that allowed you to like enter and exit the build overall. And that was kind of like a nice little outdoor patio area, which is relatively small, but I still feel like it definitely fits that cozy vibe that I was trying to go for. And I did end up using some of the cats and dogs arches for like the center sort of area of this build, because I really like how you're able to get those really wide arch variations. And yeah, I just really love the overall design of like just having something that looks traditional yet modern at the same time. So you will definitely see a lot of different elements mixed in between each other throughout this entire build. And we also have this base game curved window on the other side of the build, and it was kind of just cropping on top of the roof itself. And if you guys already know, obviously you guys can't place a window that like merges into the roof wall itself, so I just ended up using another one of those windows. I stacked it on top of the roof wall itself and just lowered it down using the tool mod to pretend as if it was like on that second floor, if that makes sense. And I feel like it works very nicely. I don't really see a lot of people do that often, mainly because it is kind of like a cheaty way of getting the window to work properly. However, I feel like in my case it definitely does look nice, and it kind of gets the image across very nicely. And I was actually heavily inspired by one specific image that I had seen on Pinterest, which I believe was like an AI generated home. Like it didn't even make a lot of sense when it came to their roofing and stuff, but I wanted to take certain elements of that and just incorporate it into this build. And for the main windows, I ended up going for some nice cross hatch like window detailing, which also had those window shutters on both sides. And I just feel like they work very nicely for a small home like this, especially since we're in Tartosa in like a very warm climate. They definitely do for some reason always house these types of windows and like those textures and styles, so I wanted to make sure that I incorporated that in this build as well. And you would notice that we actually have quite a lot of natural lighting flowing throughout this entire build, because we use a lot of these glass doors for the entrances, as well as like the side entrances and stuff like that. Just like a lot of different like really wide glass doors that are the ones that did come from the Greenhouse Haven kit, because they just feel the most appropriate, and they definitely have that specific bright white swatch that I was trying to go for. Because I feel like having a nice white wall for the entire exterior, along with having these white framed windows throughout this entire build, definitely does make it feel a bit more bright, open and airy. And I feel like if I had went with a darker color or some sort of like stone texture, it would have made the build seem smaller than it already was, because we are already working with such a small lot. I think we're on a 30 by 20 lot, but I might be mistaken on that because I feel like a lot of the walls in Tartosa are relatively smaller, and we are building this in the tallest part of in Tartosa. So if you guys go on the map, you guys can see like the tallest lot. That is exactly where we're building this right now, and I really love the scenic view that this lot has in particular, actually, because it looks down on top of the rest of Tartosa, which I feel like is very nice. And if you guys have seen my previous Tartosa builds, you guys would know that it is kind of like one of my favorite walls to build in when it comes to creating these more luxurious vacation lots and stuff like that. It just feels the most appropriate for a realistic vacation slash holiday type home. And for the main bridge area, as we had planned it out initially at the start of the build, we're finally moving back to it, and we're placing these simple little rocks all around it to cover the edges of the pond itself. And I do wish that we did have some more variation rocks in the game, because I feel like I always end up having to use the exact same one and just like change the rotation of it so it doesn't look really repetitive. But I feel like we don't actually have a lot of specific smaller type rocks that are appropriate for like repeating all around a certain area of the build, and I definitely would want more in the future, hopefully. But I did end up using some additional rocks that came from that pool party kit that came out a while ago, and I feel like they definitely worked out nicely, especially since they did have a few other color selection swatches on the rocks themselves. So I just ended up replacing those and just like changing the rotation and the swatches of it around certain parts of the pebbles, just to ensure that it doesn't look super repetitive. And right now I'm just trying to select all of the luscious and vibrant looking plants to add around this entire build overall, and I just pretty much stack them towards the entrance of this lot. And the main reason why I just do that is because I just end up copying them over and over, just like in certain areas that I thought would look appropriate, and I just really love the overall end result of it. And right now I am placing them throughout the entire foundational area as well as where we have the pond, but my game does actually end up breaking like a few moments ago, so I did have to end up repeating everything that I pretty much did based on the recording that I had initially, which you guys have already seen. So if something seemed a little bit different right now, it's because my game did actually end up crashing, so I had to end up doing all of the foliage and all the rock pieces individually all over again. So if something looks different, that is the main reason why. But yeah, so I went around all of the perimeter of the build itself as well as the pond and all of the foliage pieces I had placed, and I went around with some small little texture painting, just like trying to make it feel a little bit more realistic, especially by adding this stone texture around the perimeter of certain objects in the world. It definitely does make it pop a little bit more. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but to me it just feels a little bit more vibrant, as if it makes it like stand out a lot more. And I feel like for a game like The Sims, I feel like everything can feel a little bit too flat, especially on a really simple sort of like terrain lot like this. So I feel like it definitely does make it feel a little bit more interesting and appealing by doing that. And I do end up adding a lot of this fake greenery texture paint throughout the entire lot, and the main reason for that was because I really wanted a nice vibrant environment to work with. But we do end up blending it with the rest of the lot, so you don't have to worry about it looking really weird if you guys don't have the grid lines on or if you're not in build mode. But yeah, so we're pretty much slowly coming towards the end of adding all of the external foliage pieces and stuff like that, and I was really happy with the overall outcome. So we're finally moving on into adding the furniture pieces that we house for the exterior, and I just added these two simple star rocking chairs which came with the Horse Ranch expansion pack, on top of adding a nice simple side table. And for the first time, I'm actually adding a rug in the exterior, and I thought that was like a nice unique change, especially since we did actually have such a huge front entrance porch area that I wanted to just house some additional stuff on top of it. And I feel like the carpet definitely did help break that repetitive pattern that we had on the tiling itself. But we're slowly starting to move into the interior now, and if you guys have seen my previous builds, you guys would know that I don't tend to show my process of like creating the entire floor plan or like adding the wallpapers and the flooring and the lighting, because I feel like it feels a little bit too repetitive, because I'm kind of just used to creating 8 bedrooms in all of my builds. So I'm just like, finally there's like a bit of a change where I have 2 bedrooms and I have like a nice little seating area on the first floor, and just 2 simple basic bathrooms, one for the second floor, one for the first floor, and of course a very huge spacious dining table and kitchen area. And of course I did have to go for an open floor plan layout, because that is kind of like one of my favorite things to do in The Sims when I'm creating. I don't really like putting everything in like a small little room individually based on its function. I kind of like placing it in like an open space, but like dedicating a specific zone of that location to a specific function, if that makes sense. And I feel like it worked very nicely in this case, because it just fit very nicely with having the staircase tucked into the corner while also having both of the bathrooms just like stacked on top of each other for the first and second floor. And I ended up placing the kitchen right in the center of where we have the actual T line, and I ended up going for the cottage living expansion pack kitchen cabinets because I feel like they feel the most rustic and like woodeny, if that makes sense. I also like the ones that came with the Horse Ranch much expansion pack. However, I feel like these ones definitely do get that countryside vibe off a lot more clearly, and that is kind of like the main goal with this build, because I was trying to go for something that felt a little bit more peaceful and a bit more appropriate for other worlds if you guys do plan on using this build in other lots. But I did of course end up using a bunch of different foliage pieces based on like the tropical landscape of this world itself. But yeah, so for the main flooring throughout this entire build, I did end up going for the base game wooden paneling because I just love the minimalistic and simple design that it comes with it, and of course the color swatches that also come with it as well. I kind of went with like this nice birch beige color, which I feel like stands out a lot nicely, especially since we do end up using quite a lot of these white furniture pieces across this entire build. I feel as if the contrast definitely does help all of the furniture pieces stand out a little bit more, and I did of course try to use some more wooden furniture pieces throughout this entire build as well, especially since it does tie in a lot more appropriately with the kitchen and the living space once we move on to it. But of course I had to add a small little section off to the side of this dining table area where I house a small coffee station, and I just really love the overall end result of it, just like combining it with a bunch of different foliage pieces and a lot of different seating areas. And I also find it really interesting how we have these huge double glass doors on both sides of where we have the dining table area. It just feels really unique because it's not something that it would be expected in a generic home, something more appropriate for an outdoorsy type of like vacation lot type build, if that makes sense. And I did try to add some additional details on top of the windows themselves, such as these basic curtains, but I kind of just tend to use the same curtains throughout the entire build because I feel like there's not really that many options despite being so many years into the game. I feel like we still don't have very many appropriate curtains. They just feel a little bit too much of like a specific theme that don't fit the type of builds that I tend to create. But yeah, just added some small little furniture pieces into the kitchen itself, some small little clutter pieces here and there, on top of course changing all of the pendant lightings for the actual dining table area itself, and of course on top of the island counters for the kitchen itself as well. And I feel like it works a lot more nicer in like trying to categorize it in like a specific way. And to make this build feel a little bit more interesting as well, I did actually end up adding some additional tiling to the section where we have the dining table itself, because I wanted to kind of just like differentiate it while also maintaining a nice open floor plan layout. And of course, since we have that very huge open glass doorway, I wanted to just like have a nice simple entrance, so I didn't want to cover it up with like extra little spaces or walls. So I ended up using this little space to create the main living space area, and I didn't want to create something that was too big, especially since we didn't have a lot of space to work with, but I feel like it definitely did feel super cozy in the end. So we ended up going for some specific looking living space sofas, and they don't really resemble the generic sofas that I'll typically use in my builds, but I feel like these work and fit the vibe that I was trying to go for this build a lot more. But even though they aren't really my favorite, I still feel like they work very nicely for this build. And of course, just try to find some matching armchairs to fit at least the color scheme of the love seat sofa, just to make it feel a little bit more appropriate as well. And of course I had to add a very fancy fireplace off to the side of this living space as well, because I feel like that is like the ultimate level of coziness that you can probably get in a small build like this. So I tried to add some nice little features like that throughout this entire build. And of course you might actually notice that we have quite a lot of different plants and foliage pieces scattered across this entire build, because I just feel like they make the build feel a lot more complete rather than just like having a lot of little like empty corners and spaces and stuff like that. And of course for the main coffee table area as well, I wanted to ensure that I added some little clutter pieces on top of there as well. But before I do that, I did end up adding some nice unique pendant lighting for the living space area itself as well. And to be honest, if I had to guess what kind of design or like style this was, I probably would say it's like a farmhousey style interior, because it just features a lot of these like wooden tones and textures. But I definitely do feel like it leans towards the more traditional route rather than like a more modern approach, and I don't really mind it, to be honest, especially since it does come along very nicely together with the rest of the colors that we have in this build. And I do actually wish that we had some additional carpets that felt a little bit more minimalistic but like traditional at the same time, but we don't actually have anything like that. So I ended up using this more traditional colorful detailed rug, which I feel like looked a lot more nicer, especially since it did fit the rest of the color scheme that we had in that living space overall, matching the beige for like the cushions themselves, and of course also matching those small little blue accents that we have across that living space. But yeah, so for the main entrance area of this build, I wanted to ensure that I also had a nice simple entrance table, and I ended up using the one that came from the Adventureway expansion pack. I tried to focus on using some repetitive packs throughout this entire build, because I wanted to ensure that whoever ends up downloading this doesn't have to use a lot of different packs just to be able to use this build normally. However, when it came to like certain small details like the accent table and stuff like that, I knew I wanted to use that because I feel like that one definitely does fit the vibe of this home a lot more in comparison to the rest of the ones that we have in the game currently. And of course, just added these nice simple wicker mirrors, and I just ended up stacking them next to each other, which I feel like looked very nice. And to make the room feel just a little bit more interesting and unique, I did end up adding a simple accent wall in certain areas throughout this entire build, such as this one near the entrance, because I wanted to make it feel a little bit more different and unique from the rest of the build overall. But yeah, so we're finally moving on into the second floor now, which is where we house the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom. So none of the bedrooms actually have their own ensuite, so we kind of just have one singular primary bathroom on the first floor as well as on the second floor. And I kind of just went with tiles and floorings that I would probably expect within a traditional home like this, even though that wall accent paper definitely does feel a little bit more modern. I still feel like it works very nicely with the tiling that we have for the flooring, and it just kind of like mixes nicely together. I will have to say though that I did definitely go for a more modern approach for the upstairs bathroom, because I wanted to ensure that both of the bathrooms, despite being in the same location, I wanted them to still have like their own different like characteristics. So this one feels definitely a lot more modern in comparison to the one on the first floor, and I feel like it kind of works a lot more nicer, especially since the bedrooms also resemble that more modern approach in comparison to the first floor. And yeah, I just went with some of my favorite objects for this small little bathroom area, of course also incorporating this space gray mirror, because since it worked very nicely above this sink itself, I didn't really find it necessary to use another expansion pack to just like house another mirror, so I ended up going for that one instead, and I feel like it worked very nicely with the rest of the objects that we have in that bathroom. But yeah, so we're finally moving on into the first bedroom that we have in this build, and we kind of go for this more bright, open and airy color scheme, of course with the light blue duvets and the white bed frame itself. It just looks super great with the matching cabinets that we have on both sides as well, which I believe also came from the Life and Death expansion pack. And yeah, I just also ended up using some additional love seats on the edge of the bed, and of course adding some unique looking curtains. And I wanted to incorporate some sort of fireplace into this build, but I wasn't sure how I wanted to do that, so I ended up using the one that came from the Businesses and Hobbies expansion pack. But I feel like that one didn't really resemble a realistic environment, because it feels like that one kind of belongs in like an outdoorsy environment. So I ended up using a more antique looking fireplace that had this huge pipe that leads outside from the wall, which doesn't really make a lot of sense with the type of build that we have currently, but I still feel like it worked very nicely with like the cozy aspect that I was trying to get from this bedroom. And of course added a small little side table, and of course the dresser and the mirror. And from then on I just tried to add some small little extra details, such as trying to match the rest of the foliage pieces in this room along with the carpet itself, and of course just trying to find some nice little bedside lamps and tables, as well as some clutter pieces that match the rest of the color scheme that we have throughout this entire room. And I feel like it turned out very nice and cozy overall, of course with adding a nice simple accent wall towards the backside of the bedroom. But yeah, so we're finally moving on into the last bedroom that I have to showcase within this build, and we're starting off by using this very fancy modern looking Businesses and Hobbies bed. And I just feel like it looks super nice, and I kind of just went with a more minimalistic color scheme for this bedroom in particular. Once again, just going for that bright, open and airy color scheme, yet also just incorporating some more neutral tones such as the beiges, the browns and the sort of like light tan colors, which I feel like look very nice and appropriate for this build, especially since it does actually match the rest of the color scheme that we have on the first floor as well. And I believe, if I remember that correctly, the bedside tables themselves came from the Lovestruck expansion pack, and I feel like they match very nicely together even though they're not really from the same expansion pack. And I ended up using the new update bedside lamps in a unique swatch that comes with this brown, tan and like white color swatch, which I feel like works very nicely with the rest of the colors that we have in this room. And once again, I wanted to incorporate a fireplace in this bedroom itself, because I really like trying to incorporate some more realistic aspects in all of these rooms. Despite being in such a warm climate, I guess it might not make too much sense, but I feel like I still wanted to incorporate specific features into all of my bedrooms. And once again, just using this wicker / wooden dresser, because it is one of my favorite ones in the entire game. It just feels very appropriate because it can be used as like a side table, but also could be used as like a dresser as it is. But I just feel like it works very nicely in pretty much all of my builds, and I'm super happy with the overall end result of it. And of course just paired it with a nice antique looking standalone mirror, and I feel like it worked very nicely with the mixture of that traditional and modern aspect. And I feel like it's super fancy that they both have their own individual balcony areas. I feel like that is a very luxurious vibe to both of these bedrooms. But of course, if you guys did end up downloading this build and wanted to add some additional bedrooms or a small little nursery area, I feel like you guys definitely could. But yeah, so we're finally moving on into the main hallway area that we have on the second floor, and I pretty much just ended up using this as a small functional area, just housing a small office desk table area off to the corner of the room, along with a nice simple easel and a bookshelf. And that is pretty much it that I have for this entire speed build. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think by leaving a like and subscribing, and comment down below what your thoughts and suggestions are about this build. I would love to know in the comment sections below. And I do also have a bunch more videos like this on the channel. I will link them on the right hand side of your screens. But thanks so much again for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.